Before they tore up stadiums, trashed hotel rooms, and hijacked the airwaves of the late 80s, Guns N' Roses were just fragments of chaos on the streets of Los Angeles. The Sunset Strip in 1985 wasn't glamorous, it was filthy, competitive, and boiling with desperation. It was the kind of place where bad decisions bred brilliant music. Axl Rose-born William Bruce Rose Jr. arrived in LA from Indiana with demons in his rearview mirror. He was volatile, intense, and unapologetically weird. But he could sing like a banshee with the soul of Janis Joplin and the fire of a preacher. And he was about to find the perfect storm to match his thunder. Slash was something else entirely. Born Saul Hudson in the UK, he had a serene vibe. Until a guitar was in his hands. Raised in LA with a rock legacy in his DNA, his mom designed clothes for David Bowie. Slash brought a bluesy depth and pure filth to the guitar. He didn't need to say a word. His Les Paul did the talking. Then there was Duff McKagan, the punk rock journeyman from Seattle, who could play bass, drink anyone under the table, and keep things grounded at least relatively. Izzy Stradlin, Axl's old friend from Indiana, was the quiet rhythm guitarist with a songwriter's brain and a heroin habit. And finally, Steven Adler, the wild child behind the drum kid who loved hard and partied harder. These five guys weren't friends at first. They were barely civil. But when they played together, something happened. Something bigger than them. Something dangerous. Their rehearsals were chaotic, fueled by speed, liquor, and pure hunger. Nobody had money, nobody had structure. But they had raw electricity. The band's early gigs at places like the Troubadour and the Whiskey A Go-Go weren't polished, they were unpredictable riots with guitars. And the crowds kept getting bigger. Guns N' Roses weren't part of the LA glam scene. They hated the hairspray and spandex. They weren't trying to be pretty. They were trying to survive. And in doing so, they created a brand of rock that was as ugly, brilliant, and real as the city that raised them. In 1987, Guns N' Roses were nobodies with a record deal. By the end of the year, they were the most dangerous band in the world. When they started recording Appetite for Destruction, no one in the industry expected a masterpiece. Their label, Geffen Records, wasn't even sure how to market them. Rock radio wasn't playing them. MTV didn't want anything to do with them. But that didn't matter. Because Appetite for Destruction wasn't a record, it was a warning shot. The sessions were rough. Producer Mike Klink was one of the only people who could tolerate Axl's perfectionism and Slash's unpredictability. The band would show up late or not at all. Axl would storm out mid-take. Steven Adler was barely functioning on drums. But in between the chaos, they laid down pure gold. Welcome to the Jungle was their opening punch. It wasn't just a song, it was a manifesto. Axl's screech cut through the mix like a chainsaw. Slash's riff was violent and seductive. And the lyrics were a vicious postcard from a city that eats its young. Sweet Child O' Mine was a fluke. Slash wrote the opening lick as a joke. The rest of the band hated it. But Axl loved it. And once he wrote lyrics about his then-girlfriend Erin Everly, it became the band's unlikely power ballad, raw, sincere, and just catchy enough to sneak onto radio. The album also had Paradise City, Night Train, and It's So Easy, songs about getting wasted, getting hurt, and getting even. This wasn't rock music you brought home to your mom. This was the sound of five men on the edge of collapse, and it resonated with millions. When the album finally broke, it did so with a vengeance. Appetite for Destruction sold over 30 million copies. It was the highest-selling debut album of all time. And suddenly, these broke kids from the Strip were global icons. But the fame didn't fix the fractures. It magnified them. Axl was becoming increasingly volatile, showing up late to gigs, demanding control over everything from set lists to security. Slash and Duff were drowning in drugs and booze. Steven Adler's heroin habit was getting worse. And Izzy? He was already halfway out the door. The band had reached the top of the world and they were about to light the whole thing on fire. By 1989, Guns N' Roses were no longer hungry underdogs. They were the biggest rock band on the planet and they were coming apart at the seams. Their live shows had become unpredictable roller coasters. One night they'd deliver the greatest rock performance of the year. The next, Axl might disappear for 90 minutes mid-set, or the band would storm off stage after just 3 songs. Axl Rose wasn't just a frontman anymore, he was a powder keg. He demanded total control, clashed with bandmates, and refused to be treated like a puppet. His paranoia grew as fast as his fame. He started hiring personal security, canceling shows, and threatening to quit. And while Axl spiraled in one direction, Steven Adler spiraled in another. The drummer's heroin addiction had gotten so bad that he couldn't keep time in the studio. The band tried to help him, even giving him an ultimatum: get clean or get out. He failed to deliver. In 1990, they officially fired him. It was brutal. Adler would later say that it felt like getting divorced from his family. But for the rest of the band, it was necessary. Enter Matt Sorum, a technically better drummer, less wild, more professional. He helped stabilize the rhythm section. But the band's soul took a hit. Steven had been chaotic, but he brought a kind of childlike joy that couldn't be replaced. At the same time, keyboardist Dizzy Reed joined the lineup, expanding the band's sound and causing even more internal rifts. Guns N' Roses were evolving, but not everyone liked where it was heading. Especially Izzy Stradlin. The rhythm guitarist was disgusted by the excess. He'd gotten sober, but the rest of the band hadn't. He was sick of the drama, the drugs, the late shows, and the press scandals. In late 1991, after a decade of building the band with Axl, Izzy quietly walked away. No announcement. No drama. He was just gone. The band that conquered the world in '87 was unraveling in real time. But instead of collapsing, they did something even more shocking: they doubled down. With Izzy gone and Steven replaced, most bands would have leaned into safe, crowd-pleasing territory. But Guns N' Roses weren't like most bands. They were gamblers, and their next move was their most audacious yet. In September 1991, they released Use Your Illusion I and Use Your Illusion II simultaneously. 2 full-length albums. 30 songs. Nearly 2.5 hours of music. It was a swing so massive it bordered on arrogance. But it worked. The albums were a sonic leap forward. No longer confined to the raw grit of Appetite, these songs were more ambitious, more orchestral, more theatrical. There were epic ballads like November Rain, where Axl poured his soul into a 9-minute piano-driven saga complete with full string arrangements and a guitar solo that sounded like a funeral and a firestorm at once. It was the kind of song Queen might have written if Freddie Mercury had grown up in Indiana. Then there was Don't Cry, a tragic, vulnerable wail of lost love. Civil War, a scathing anti-conflict anthem. Estranged, another piano epic filled with spiraling riffs and lyrics about isolation and madness. But they didn't abandon their roots. You Could Be Mine brought back the venom. Pretty Tied Up and Garden of Eden reminded fans this was still a band with teeth. And tucked away in the chaos was a Bob Dylan cover Knockin' on Heaven's Door, which somehow fit them perfectly. Critics were divided. Some praised the ambition. Others said it was bloated and self-indulgent. But fans ate it up. Both albums debuted at the top of the charts. The band launched the Use Your Illusion tour, which would become one of the longest and most infamous tours in rock history. They played stadiums around the world. The shows were big, loud, and unpredictable. Fights broke out in the crowd. Axl would walk off stage mid-set. Fans rioted. Lawsuits followed. And still, the tickets kept selling. Behind the scenes, it was barely controlled chaos. Axl was isolating further. Slash and Duff were deeper in addiction. The camaraderie that once held the band together had turned into silence, lawyers, and paranoia. But on stage, they still sounded like gods. Guns N' Roses weren't just living the rockstar myth, they were pushing it to its limits. And while the cracks were getting bigger, no one could argue, they were still on top of the world. The question now was how much longer could they hold it together? By the end of 1993, Guns N' Roses had burned brighter than nearly any band before them. But the flame was dying. After the Use Your Illusion tour finally wrapped in mid-1993, they released The Spaghetti Incident, a covers album that felt more like a contractual obligation than a creative triumph. It included punk and glam rock tracks that Axl loved, but it didn't land. There was no cohesion, no spark, and no band unity to support it. In private, Guns N' Roses weren't speaking. Axl had distanced himself from the others, surrounding himself with lawyers, bodyguards, and an ever-tightening circle of control. He was becoming less of a bandmate and more of a CEO. Meanwhile, Slash was falling deeper into drugs. Duff's drinking was spiraling. Matt and Dizzy were along for the ride, but the creative glue that once held them together, Izzy's writing, Adler's wild drumming, and the camaraderie of the original lineup, was gone. By 1994, they were functionally finished, but no one said it out loud. Years passed. No albums. No tours. Just rumors. Axl holed up in his mansion, working on new music with a rotating cast of session players. The other members scattered. Slash tried to connect with Axl, but the trust was gone. Eventually, even Slash had enough. In 1996, he quit. Then Duff walked in 1997. Matt Sorum followed in 1998. By the late 90s, Guns N' Roses was Guns N' Axl. The man who once screamed against the machine had become his own machine. He owned the band's name and legal rights. He built a fortress around himself, both literally and artistically. But without the original lineup, something essential had been lost. The danger. The unpredictability. The raw chemistry. Fans waited, wondering if they'd ever see the real Guns N' Roses again. But instead of a comeback, they got a ghost. If you told a Guns N' Roses fan in 1993 that it would take 15 years for the next studio album to come out, they would have laughed. Or cried. But that's exactly what happened. The Chinese democracy saga is one of the most infamous stories in rock history. It began as early as 1994, with Axl experimenting in the studio with industrial influences, orchestral arrangements, and a whole new lineup of musicians. He recruited Robin Fink from Nine Inch Nails, guitarist Buckethead, known for wearing a KFC bucket on his head, and a rotating cast of hired guns. But the lineup was always in flux. Members came and went. Producers changed. Studio bills ballooned. And still no album. The years dragged on. Axl became a punchline. Chinese democracy became the rock world's white whale. Rumors swirled, it was finished. It wasn't. It had 50 songs. It had none. Millions were being spent. Lawsuits were being filed. Still, nothing. Then finally on November 23, 2008, Chinese Democracy was released. After 15 years, $14 million, and near-mythical expectations, the album dropped with more of a whisper than a bang. The reception? Mixed. Some praised Axl's ambition. The production was lush. The songs were layered and complex. Better and There Was a Time had moments of brilliance. Street of Dreams carried echoes of the old GNR drama and melody. But it wasn't Appetite. It wasn't even Illusion. It was something else entirely, a solo project with the Guns N' Roses name. The original band members were gone. The chaos was sanitized. The danger replaced with perfectionism. For many fans, it felt like an echo of greatness rather than greatness itself. Still, Axl toured with his new band. And slowly, something unexpected began to happen. People started showing up. They sang along. They cheered. They still cared. Maybe Axl hadn't won the war, but he hadn't lost everything either. And in the silence between the songs, a question began to rise. Could the real Guns N' Roses ever come back? For decades, Axl Rose and Slash didn't speak. Not a word. Slash once described the breakup as the divorce without a prenup. And Axl? He called Slash a cancer. The wounds ran deep. The fans had given up hope. But something changed in the 2010s. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was the creeping realization that nothing they did solo would ever match what they had together. In 2015, rumors began to swirl. Duff had already reconnected with Axl, playing a few shows. Slash started giving softer interviews. Then out of nowhere the impossible happened. In January 2016, Guns N' Roses announced a reunion. Axl, Slash, Duff. Not all the original members, but close enough to ignite a firestorm of excitement. The tour was called Not in This Lifetime, a nod to Axl's infamous quote when asked if a reunion would ever happen. The first show sold out instantly. Then the next. Then the next. Fans flooded stadiums, from Las Vegas to Buenos Aires. People flew across the world to see what no one thought they'd ever witness again. Axl and Slash, side by side. Sharing a stage. Sharing solos. Sharing a history that, for all its pain, still had power. And the craziest part? They were good. Really good. Axl, after some early vocal struggles, found a groove. Slash played like a man possessed. Duff held down the low end with swagger. Dizzy was still there. And new drummer Frank Ferrer brought power and consistency. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was a resurrection. Guns N' Roses were back. And for the first time in decades, they looked like a band. The Not in This Lifetime tour became one of the highest-grossing tours in rock history, pulling in over $580 million. But the money was only part of the story. For fans, it was about closure. Healing. For Axl and Slash, it was something deeper. A truce. An acknowledgement that whatever else had happened, they had built something together that could never be replicated. They weren't the same angry young punks who once brawled backstage and trashed hotel rooms. They were grown men now. With scars. With families. With perspective. But they still had that spark. The shows were long, sometimes over 3 hours. They played Appetite, Illusion, and even Chinese Democracy cuts. Slash added his touch to songs he never played on originally. It was weird, but it worked. And then something even more surreal happened. In 2016, during a break in the GNR tour, Axl Rose filled in as the lead singer of AC/DC after Brian Johnson suffered hearing loss. It sounded insane, but somehow, it worked. Axl respected the material. He brought power. Discipline. He even showed up early for rehearsals, something almost unheard of in the GNR days. The press started asking, had Axl finally changed? The band didn't release a new album right away. But they stayed on the road. Year after year. The reunion wasn't a cash grab, it became a second act. Sure, Steven Adler and Izzy Stradlin were missing. But even they made surprise appearances now and then. Enough to remind fans of what once was. In the end, it wasn't about recreating the past. It was about making peace with it. Guns N' Roses had defied every rule, every prediction. They were supposed to die young. To flame out. Instead, they adapted. They evolved. They survived. So where does it all leave us? Guns N' Roses didn't just make music. They made a mess. A glorious, chaotic, unforgettable mess that redefined what a rock band could be and how far one could fall. They weren't the tightest band. They weren't the most consistent. But they had something most bands only dream of: danger. Fire. A real sense that anything could happen at any moment on stage, in the studio, or in the streets. And for better or worse, they lived that truth. Axl Rose may go down as one of the most volatile and iconic frontmen in rock history. He was unpredictable, unfiltered, and impossible to replace. He wasn't always likable. But he was always electric. Slash became the symbol of rock guitar for a generation. His top hat. His Les Paul. His solos. They were pure attitude, bluesy, melodic, untouchable. Duff McKagan, the quiet punk rock lifeline of the band, brought grit and grounding. And players like Izzy Stradlin and Steven Adler gave the early GNR records their secret sauce: loose, dirty grooves, and streetwise flair. Together, they captured something fleeting. Something raw. In an era of processed pop and corporate safe rock, Guns N' Roses kicked the doors down. They reminded people that music should be dangerous, uncontrolled, human. And while they burned bridges, lost years, and missed countless chances when they showed up, they delivered. Their influence? Massive. Every hard rock band that came after Velvet Revolver, Buckcherry, The Darkness, and even post-grunge acts owed something to GNR's reckless authenticity. Even now, as they headline festivals in their 60s, there's a fire in them. A flicker of that old danger. They're not perfect. They never were. But maybe that's the point. They weren't trying to be legends. They just didn't know how to stop. In the end, Guns N' Roses were never just about music. They were about energy. That feeling in your chest when Welcome to the Jungle kicks in. That chaos in your veins when Axl screams. That swagger in Slash's solo. That edge that makes you feel alive, even if it's just for 4 minutes. They weren't built to last. But they lasted anyway. They were broken and rebuilt. Torn apart and duct taped back together. And still they mattered. They still matter. Because in a world that's getting safer, cleaner, and more polished, Guns N' Roses remind us what it looks like when rock and roll is real. Messy. Loud. Wild. And maybe just maybe they were the last band that really meant it.